Hello everybody. Now today I wanted to have a look at the epigraph to A Streetcar Named Desire. Now this appears at the very beginning of the text, and I think that it's often overlooked in terms of its significance to the play and the way in which it explores some of the central themes and concerns that we see in the play. Now an epigraph is quite simply a quotation that appears at the beginning of a literary work, and more often than not it suggests and hints at some of the central concerns and themes that will follow. Now, as this was a play, Williams made sure that the epigraph was printed at the front of the programmes so that the audience would have this text in mind before they watched the play. Now, Williams's epigraph is taken it is the fifth stanza of a much longer poem called The Broken Tower by the poet Hart Crane. Now, it's fair to say that Hart Crane was one of Williams's literary idols and icons. He felt really a strong personal affinity with Crane. Okay, they both had quite difficult relationships with their parents and also suffered from bouts of quite violent alcoholism. He also identified with Crane as a homosexual writer who was trying to find a means and a way of self-expression in a heterosexual world. And arguably, both Williams and Crane were trying to find their identities as gay men at a time when obviously there was still quite a lot of intense social and cultural stigma attached to homosexuality. Unfortunately, Hart Crane did succumb to his demons, and like the tortured young poet of Alan Gray that we see in Streetcar, Hart Crane committed suicide at a tragically young age. He actually threw himself from a ship that he was travelling on. And as The Broken Tower was one of his last poems that Crane wrote before his death, some readers have basically seen it akin to his last will and testament. And the poem really captures this sense of an isolated and lost poet trying to kind of find this elusive happiness. So there were certain personal parallels that can be drawn both between Hart Crane and Williams. And I just wanted to show a little clip from quite a rare interview of Williams where he speaks about Hart Crane personally.
Tennessee, a man who influenced you profoundly is an American poet named Hart Crane. You have, if I understand it correctly, indicated in your will that you wish to be buried at sea in a manner that would
place my bones close to the bones, the submerged bones of Hart Crane.
Tell us why and what he meant to you.
Hart Crane's life was very similar to mine. He had a very worldly father. His father was involved in the manufacture of candy, mine in shoes. And we had very similar backgrounds. He was overly devoted to his mother, as I was to mine. Mm-hmm. And we both wrote out of an intense personal need.
Was he also homosexual?
Yes, he was indeed. And he made absolutely no disguise of the fact. And he shocked people a great deal.
Must have brought a lot of pain into his life at that point.
Whether it did or not, he didn't care.
Mm-hmm.
He drank heavily, unfortunately. But I don't think he gave a damn whether he shocked people. And I've never cared whether I shock people, because I think people who are shocked by the truth are not deserving of the truth. And the truth is something one has to deserve.
Okay, so you can see there that Williams himself draws quite clear parallels between his life and the life of Hart Crane. And a Williams scholar from the University of Brussels, Gilbert Deboucher, says that among the few permanent possessions William took with him on his constant peregrinations, meaning kind of journeys, long journeys, were a copy of Hart Crane's collected poems and a framed portrait of the poet. So again, this kind of highlights the importance of Hart Crane to Williams as a writer. Now, on a more literary note, Williams was also drawn to Hart Crane's quite complex and highly individualized use of metaphor and imagery. So let me read the epigraph in full. And so it was I entered the broken world, to trace the visionary company of love, its voice an instant in the wind, I know not whither hurled, but not for long to hold each desperate choice. Now, as you can see, this is quite rich, dense, and complex poetry. But what this stanza does do is it succeeds in expressing Crane, the poet's sense of isolation and his doomed search for an elusive happiness. Now, through this, it's quite easy to draw clear parallels between both Williams as a writer and the play's protagonist, Blanche de Bois. The poem succeeds in evoking the quite delicate, fragile, fractured and melancholy world of Blanche as she desperately seeks the visionary company of love. And we see this in her attempts to flirt and to kind of gain Mitch's favour, don't we, throughout the play. The poem also captures a love, the sense of love as a transitory illusion, something that's here 1 second and gone the next, something fleeting, an instant in the wind. It also brings up this image of a gambler's desperate choice. Now, both of these images are strongly suggestive of Blanche's experience of love in the broken world of Elysian Fields, a world which has no place for what Williams called the nonconformist individual. Now, it's quite easy, as I've done, to link this broken world with that of Elysian Fields, but it's also important to remember that Blanche herself is broken by her traumatic past, and also this idea of being broken is also perpetuated by her non-stop, never-ending lies and deceit, her penchant for illusion and fantasy. The epigraph, as I've mentioned, describes love almost as a transitory illusion, an instant in the wind, and a force that then causes each desperate choice that follows. And obviously here, as I've mentioned, this draws obvious parallels with Blanche. And the idea of not knowing whither love's voice is hurled also suggests Blanche's quite desperate search for the visionary company of love, because with increasing desperation throughout the play, Blanche hurls her continually denied love out into the world. And this sense of desperation, this desperation for desire, in effect, ultimately results in her, at least metaphorical, death. This continual denial of a broken world that has no place for the nonconformist individual. So all of these central themes and ideas are encapsulated in this epigraph. And to kind of get to a more exam-focused point of view, there are very few occasions where this is kind of applied and used in an effective way in an exam response. But if we look at the Edexcel examiner's report for the drama paper in 2018, students were asked to explore the theme of confrontation in Streetcar. And here is an example, as it says, from a high scoring response that had a somewhat interesting angle looking at the confrontations between male characters. So again, another example of Edexcel rewarding an alternative interpretation of the play and the question. Now, this little extract is taken from a much longer response that begins by looking at the interplay between Stanley and Mitch, some of the confrontation there, the differing views of masculinity. And we see in this little extract here, the student successfully integrate some information about Hart Crane as a contextual point. So this would be a good little snippet for AO3 context marks. Williams notably saw male relationships differently to the majority of society at the time, for he himself as a homosexual and, like Hart Crane, who he quotes from the Broken Tower in the Epigraph, who implies that the physical nature of society is an aspect of the broken world that is governed by conflict. Interesting point. Now look here how it draws a comparison between Crane and Williams. Crane, like Williams, who had to suffer societal views on homosexuality, and both writers also had alcoholism. I would have probably said both writers suffered from alcoholism. Interestingly, Williams subverts the fact that New Orleans was allegedly progressive in its toleration of male relationships when Alan Gray is labelled degenerate. Now this is true, and Williams himself has spoken about the relative progressive and forward-thinking views of New Orleans with regards to homosexuality in comparison to the rest of America. He's also quite keen to stress this with regards to race relations. In the stage directions, we are told that the French Quarter has a relatively easy intermingling of the races, but these somewhat progressive views are undermined by Stella calling Alan Gray a degenerate, which suggests that male relationships were in fact a deep confrontation with the traditional values of society. So what we see here is a successful attempt to integrate the epigraph, elements of the epigraph, and Hart Crane as a writer, drawing parallels between himself and Williams, and also looking at and exploring the societal views of homosexuality here as another kind of alternative form of confrontation. So elements of this epigraph, and certainly Hart Crane as a writer, can be successfully integrated into high-level exam responses. I hope this has helped you somewhat, and yeah, good luck with your studying.